All right, happy Monday, everybody. We'll call this special meeting to order. And the purpose of this meeting is to get a status report on the facilities master plan for the town. I'll just give a little bit of context here. Over the past year plus, the school district has been working with Tecton Architects, developing a long-range plan for maintaining and improving our school buildings. And we know that in the years to come, there are going to be some very significant capital investments needed on the Board of Education side. And we wanted to make sure that we're looking at all of the town's needs holistically. So we made the strategic decision to hire Tecton to also evaluate the town buildings. And since we can afford anything but not everything, we thought that it would be important to look at the school's capital needs and the town's needs together. So for this presentation, I'll turn it over to Tom Roy, and Tom, I'll ask you to introduce the Jeffs, and you can take it away.
Sure. Well, I think most of you are familiar with Jeff Winarski, who did he was the principal in charge for the Tecton team doing the master plan for the Board of Education, and Jeff McElvery has been in that role for the town side. And I'm glad to see both of them here because, again, part of why we chose Tecton is they're helping us to blend these two master plans together because ultimately it's one capital plan that's going to be impacted by the choices. Jeff, I believe you were set up so that you can start the presentation from your end.
All right. Do you see the screen?
I can see the screen.
Very good.
Okay. Well, I think we can kind of start to jump right in. I think everybody knows that we're here just to get an understanding of where we are at this point now that we've been working on this for just about a year on the town side. We have a lot of material to go through tonight, so we just laid out a little bit of what we're going to cover in tonight's agenda. And I'm really hoping that we can get through some of this material quickly so that we'll have a lot of time at the end to hopefully have a healthy discussion and really have a chance to question and dig in and really make both Jeffs work very hard at answering all of the tough questions. So we go to the next one there, Jeff. As we kind of touched on, we have the two principal architects from Tecton, but I think what is so important to keep in mind as we go through this presentation tonight is that Tecton was the leader of a larger team of design professionals, architects, engineers, and technical experts, so that we looked at all of our buildings with experts in every single facet. So when we were looking at our roofs, we had people that's what they did looking at our roofs, and the same when we were looking at boilers and air conditioning systems and electrical panels. This was really a broad brush approach so that the right people were looking at the right aspects of our building. And then we had every single town department was involved. Jeff did a wonderful job of doing some really deep dives into the interviews with all of the department heads to find out what are some of the challenges of the buildings that they're in, what are some of the programming that they're doing now, and what are some of the programs that they would like to do if they had different facilities, and how would that look? We move on to the next slide, Jeff. One of the big questions that I think was important to start this presentation off of, why are we doing all of this hard work and what's the reason for it? And it comes down to the fact that we own 62 structures, some large buildings like Town Hall and some things as small as the bus shelter down on Iron Horse Boulevard. All need to be maintained, and we want to make sure we do our maintenance in a cost-effective manner. We want to make sure that we have a long-range plan so all of a sudden we don't come to the board with these huge capital expenses that you didn't see coming. A lot of the large infrastructure doesn't just wear out overnight. We know sometimes it does, but usually we have some level of indication when something's coming towards the end of its useful life. The other thing I can't stress enough is how fortunate we were to bring Tecton on board. Being that this was the same team that looked at our Board of Education buildings, we felt there was just unique advantages to allow now these two master plans to be compared one next to the other, and it was a true apples to apples comparison. The same team looked at all of the buildings, so it's not a case of somebody was looking at every negative aspect and another consultant was looking at everything as if it was going to be bright sunny skies all the time. It was the same criteria used across both master plans. With that, we get into what our project goals were. We truly wanted an independent analysis. When we get into the rankings that Jeff and the Tecton team came up with, they are the rankings from the Tecton team. The town and myself did not tell them how to rank any of our buildings. We really, truly benefit from their third-party observation and arm's length look at all of our structures. Again, can't stress it enough, we wanted consistency between the town and Board of Education. We wanted somebody with a fresh set of eyes, looking at all of our programming, looking for possible benefits or how we could use our buildings differently. The strategic implementation of the recommendations. By looking at all of our buildings at one time, we now have the ability, and we're going to get into it as we talk about capital planning, that maybe I'll let a little secret out. We have elevators that need to be replaced at Town Hall, Eno, and the library. There are huge benefits to doing all of those replacements under one larger contract. And with this holistic look, we're looking at better design packages. So we really get the most bang for our buck in everything that we do. And again, the long range planning tool. Let's look 5, 10, 15 years into the future. Jeff is a little ambitious with 20 years, but that's great. Let's keep our eyes to the future and make sure that we're planning for the long term.
So Tom, were you stealing my thunder or foreshadowing there?
Oh, I'm just giving a little foreshadowing because I'm handing it over to you now to explain all the hard work you guys did.
So I want to give you a little bit of an overview of the process that we went through in doing the study. And of course, it starts off with a lot of data collection. We've got to get all the information that you have already in place. And that includes existing building drawings. It includes previous studies or reports. It looks at utility bills. That's something that comes into play when we start thinking about energy efficiency and the lifespan of systems. So there's a lot of collection. We actually set up an exchange site where all the information that came from the town of Simsbury went onto our server and then was available to all of our consultant team, so everybody could see all of the information and start drawing the information they needed to make assessments of the conditions of the facilities. The next thing was to conduct some site visits, and of course, timing could not have been better. I think just as we scheduled site visits, there was a pandemic hit, and we had to deal with working around buildings that were essentially not accessible because of the current situation. But we did have a crew go around and visit all of those 62 structures that were mentioned earlier and the sites that go with them. And again, that was a multidisciplinary team that looked at everyone. And we had a long list of items that we each looked for. So, you can see there's a partial list on the screen here, including the ADA issues, both internal and external. Site conditions, our civil engineers took a good look at those, looking at all the walkways and the pavings and the landscaping and the drainage systems. The building envelopes, whether it's windows or walls, whether things need painted, looking at roof conditions and the age of roofs. We documented the ages of all the roofs so that we could understand where they are in their warranty cycle and where we may be looking at anticipating, an end of life issue coming up. We also looked at all the interior condition. Of course, that's, walking around looking at the finishes, understanding what the conditions are. Also door hardware, that plays into that ADA issue. And then our mechanical, electrical, plumbing engineers looked at all the equipment. We photographed every single nameplate on all of the equipment so that we could understand the age of each piece of equipment and understand its efficiency for use in evaluating energy utilization later on. And of course, all the electrical issues, making sure we understood the condition of lighting, what kind of lighting that you're using, fire alarms, security systems. So a lot of different things that were looked at. Then we came up with a ranking system. I'm going to show you a little bit about that ranking system here in a moment. We conducted the programming interviews that Tom spoke of earlier. I just like asking questions, so I guess that's what that in-depth study that we did. Now, it was really good talking to all your staff and understanding the programs that they're offering and looking for the opportunities. In what ways are the facilities enhancing or inhibiting the opportunity to offer programs to the community? And so by coming to an understanding about those sorts of things, it helps us to make decisions about what kinds of space we should look for in other municipal facilities or the opportunities that could exist. Strategy sessions. We've done a lot of internal strategy sessions. I believe we'll have more of those to come as we start to decide what and when and how we're going to go about implementing some of the results of this study. And of course, the final piece on this slide is the identification of the capital improvement projects. So again, I'm going to give you an example of that here in a moment, so I won't blow it all right now. But understanding what the cost of all of these issues is and when they fall into place in terms of looking down the future as work needs to be completed. So after all of those site visits, we did a general narrative, and you can see that we gave a high-level overview from an architectural, from a site civil standpoint, from each of the engineering disciplines to understand, sort of at a high level, what's the status of the building and its systems. So the narratives talk a lot about some of the big picture elements we see. Is also give an overview of the kinds of materials and equipment that we saw in place. Oh, that one came up a little slow on my end. I don't know if it's up on yours. The data and ranking. The sheet that you see in front of you is the one that we actually had out in the field. And there was a sort of a 5-point ranking system. And this is the same system that we used for the schools, ranking all of the different elements of the building from very poor at 1 to very good at 5. And you can see that some of the notes in there, we looked at the roofing and got an age on it and gave it a score. You go down every single element in the building and identify, okay, what's its condition? And we look at not only its physical condition, but we look at its age. If we can identify when it was installed, we want to make sure that we understand where it is in its total life cycle. Here's a great example. These are the steam-fired boilers over at Eno Memorial Hall, and they got a rating of 3. And there's two big reasons why they got a rating of 3, is that they are coming towards the end of their useful life. The recommended capital improvement time frame for those is from 5 to 10 years. So we're not done yet, but we're getting closer. But another important factor is they're only 85% efficient. Obviously, there are much more efficient boilers on the market today. So these are big issues that you need to think about is, all right, when am I going to have to replace it? When do I anticipate it starting to have failures requiring maintenance? And what is the payback if I were to replace it? And what kind of equipment should I put in place of it to maybe save on energy costs? So all of those things start to get evaluated. And you can see the heating system description I pulled out of that narrative that I showed you earlier. And that talks again about the age. There's 3 of these units here and gives us an overview. So later on when we're not sitting here, so Tom can look over it from one square over here to the next square and ask me about the boilers. He's got this resource in his hands in terms of not only the written report, but also electronically. So that's an asset that continues to be available to the town. All right, so the programming exercise. We met with a lot of your department heads and their teams, and we had some nice conversations talking about, starting with, current staffing, talking a little bit about what staff changes they might see, pull out the crystal ball and think about what kind of programs or what kind of needs may come in the future. And if there was the possibility of an additional staff, we wanted to get that down so we could understand its impact on space utilization. And then we go through all of the different functions that agency or department is conducting, how they're going about it, what are the limitations. We spent a lot of time talking about building conditions as we explored sort of program ideas, because sometimes they're sort of bound together. For instance, we talked about the rotunda, that round space, and how it echoes so much and how it's difficult for some of the senior center users to communicate with when you got all that echoing and that acoustic issue going on. So all of that helps us to understand some of the programmatic expectations that department might have going forward. There's a couple common requests over in that yellow box that came out of those. Training, meeting, program space. We heard a number of times from different departments. Better HVAC control. We hear that one everywhere, but we did hear it in your town as well. And there was a lot of talk about parking, parking accessibility and proximity. So those are some of the big key takeaways that were consistently came out of those programming dialogues. So just another deep dive into some examples here. And here we're looking at Memorial Hall, which is used for social services. And, I purposely picked that picture in the middle because it shows what a grand and glorious building that is. Actually, both of them side by side there. And in this case, you're making use of the building, but is it the first best use of that space? And you can see that, one picture, we got the pandemic image of the food bank going on in that beautiful auditorium. We've got sort of the challenges of vertical circulation that some of the seniors face utilizing that facility. I did the one room up in the upper right there. There's a sign outside that says youth room. And you go in and it doesn't feel like a youth space. I guess that's an old sign from it's part of the history of there. But again, you see that you got, function space that's interrupted by columns. You've got challenges with accessibility. So again, here comes the list of some of the findings that come out of that. From the standpoint of social services, we've got no covered drop-off for buses and vans, with limited accessible entries, program space for seniors on multiple floors. We've got some funky storage arrangements for the food bank. When we aren't in pandemic situations, the food is stored in a storeroom under a stair. And then when we do face a situation like that, it spills out into the auditorium spaces as well. And then, of course, we have very limited capability of storing refrigerated food there as well. And we've got, again, I mentioned the multiple floor program space that results in poor observability from the staff, so they know what's going on with the seniors that are utilizing that facility. An auditorium space that isn't being used at an auditorium. Okay, what was it, Tom? It was a line dancing class for 4, and we're using tempering the whole auditorium for that program. So, great program, great space. Maybe they don't belong together. And then acoustics. I mentioned a little bit about the rotunda there, but the acoustics in the auditorium again are not made for the kind of functions that are going on there. Outdated heating and cooling control, and then the parking and the site grade are just not very friendly and accessible for the senior center function that goes on there. So we've got a number of challenges, and it raises the question of is this the first best use for this facility? So we'll look at a number of the other findings in here. This is my transition slide where we get to look at all your beautiful assets that you have in the community. And one thing that I want to start out with is that overall your town buildings are well maintained. Much of what we're seeing is sort of the life cycle issues that affect all buildings. Mechanical equipment has a lifespan, and in cases you're coming near the end of it. Fire alarms have a lifespan. Security systems, new technology comes up, and you have the opportunity for advancing security. And finishes, of course, always have a lifespan. So good maintenance, but again, lifespan issues. Site repairs and improvements. We visited 18 sites while looking at those 62 structures, and again, we're seeing a lot of normal wear and tear, pavement, walks, curbs, things like that are coming to the end of their lifespan. HVAC and lighting, we have notes anywhere from, you need to address this soon to 5 to 10 years on some of the lifespan of the equipment. And then, of course, ADA improvements also noted, particularly at a couple of key facilities. At both Eno and the town hall, you do have ramps into the building, although perhaps not the most gracious ramps into the buildings. So from all of that, we start to develop our capital improvement list, and this is a snippet of Eno Memorial Hall. Again, we're kind of using that as our example for this evening, but this is just a portion of the list of items that goes into that. I'm not expecting you to read this right now because I realize it's really small, but basically you get every single item that we observed that came to that list of 1 to 5 as needing to be addressed at some time in the future. And then we did a cost estimate for its current value today of what that cost might be. The summation down at the bottom gives the soft cost add-on to the hard cost that is listed up above. So that I think, oh, there we go. There I get a box so I can show it to you. So that you can see, we mark it up with the soft cost so that you know what the total project cost would be. You know, it's one thing to say it's going to cost me $5,000 to fix this, but if I've got to get an engineer to come and specify it, and I've got to bid it, and so there's other costs that go into that to help you get to the full project cost. And here's a CIP identification example. This happens to be the fire alarm system at Eno Hall. Some of this has been replaced not so long ago in 2006. And, you know, overall, the fire alarm system did get a rating of 3 because some of it's good, it's new, some of it's older. You can see in the narrative piece that I clipped out below, and I just took snippets because that was a very long narrative, but we've still got some back boxes used as raceways. Pool stations are older. We've got an auditorium which doesn't have a voice-capable automatic notification system. So even though, yes, in fact, there's some life left on it here, you know, we're looking at a 3 to 5 year time frame before you ought to think about bringing the entire system up to current standards. And of course, you know, there's the hard cost estimate and then the markup of the soft costs that go to build up that in total project cost. So you've got a whole list of these kinds of things for the various buildings. Some of them don't have.
I have a question on that.
Certainly, yes, sir.
This is Sean. So like current standards, like, I mean, technically the moment you install a fire alarm, it's no longer current, right?
That's correct, yeah.
So what does that mean? I mean, the thing will still detect a fire and let the fire department know, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So, I mean, because, you know, $63,000 is nothing to scoff at, but I mean, are we talking about the building being in danger here? Or are we talking about this is something that we should think about, but can continue to go on?
Sean, this is Dick Ostop. As you know, we just did a major project at the Eno, including update of the fire alarm system. And it was checked by the fire marshal as well, and we got done. And there's no fire problem there at this point.
Okay. Yeah.
3 years from now, 5 years from now, who knows what can happen tomorrow? It's going to snow.
Yeah.
You just don't know.
Yeah, if we had seen an imminent risk, then this would have gotten into the immediate category. It wouldn't have a 3 to 5 year time frame on it. You know, what we are acknowledging is that you do have some older components of that system, although there's some great upgrades as well. There are some older components that you may begin to have failures with or life cycle issues with. So bringing the rest of that system up to speed, I think in that time frame would make sense. All right, so now we get down to some of the recommendations, and there's a few of them, and I've highlighted sort of the bigger picture ones, and these are some of the things that have come out of the dialogues that we've had after looking at all the results. Many of you may be aware that there was a prior master plan for the town hall, which include renovations to the main floor. We took a look at that. We do have a couple suggestions, some minor modifications of that certainly will be part of that strategic discussion to come. But that's one of the things that we're looking forward is you know, something that is recommended that you get in your upcoming capital plan. And also that includes some renovations on the lower level because we have some new leadership positions coming into play for the police department. So reworking some of that existing space so that we have the office space for those people is also included in that recommendation. Improvement to the parking lots at Town Hall and Eno is one of those. Accessibility and site improvements at Eno. I think I just mentioned a little bit ago that you have ramps, but maybe not gracious ramps, but there's certainly opportunity for other improvements on the site there as well. Elevator upgrades, Tom, that's the one that you stole my thunder with there. So there it is. Yeah, elevator upgrades for Eno, Town Hall, and Library. And again, that's you know, modernization of the cab, the controls, the equipment that operates the elevator. And then one of the other ones that we sort of clumped together was upgrades to security and fire alarm systems at some of the major facilities. And again, to the point that was made earlier, these are not at the point of imminent failure, but they are coming to the point where we need to start addressing and upgrading some of the devices. Security was one that there was a lot of conversation about in programming. I think having a consistent platform for the town to do some access control and enhance security is probably a great benefit. Continuing on with recommendations, some of these, we also cross-referenced the Parks and Rec master plan, because in looking at structures, we also looked at sites. So we wanted to make sure we were looking at that master plan as well and thinking about it. But certainly one that came out of the discussions was the replacement of the memorial pool with a splash pad and upgrades to the bathhouse, improvements to parking, accessibility, and restrooms at the Simsbury Performing Arts Center and Rotary Park. Some restroom pavilions that are accessible to both those spaces would be a great benefit. Renovations to the golf clubhouse at Simsbury Farms. Some changes that are necessary at that, and then some state required upcoming improvements at the transfer station. And then finally, this one sort of got the recommendations opportunities. As we looked across all of these different programs and spaces, we started realizing, that was not the first best use or the senior center wasn't the first best use for and that might be a better asset to helping the community with community groups and performing arts space. The SCTV use in the lower level, I think, makes a lot of sense with that space. But so then, okay, if you're not going to do that, what are you going to do? And constructing a space for seniors does make some sense. However, how do you get some real benefit out of that? And when we heard that Parks and Recs is looking for program space, and we have multiple departments looking for meeting and training space, and even some larger meeting space, we ended up saying, there's a way to blend a lot of these ideas together and create maybe a facility that serves a lot of different purposes and can function a lot longer during the daytime hours, not just doing the lunch program for the seniors, which is, it's just one of the big programs. It's a big benefit we see in a lot of communities that you offer here. But then after school programs and then even evening utilization and training assets for all the community departments could all be in that space. And it really made some sense to think about that on the site of that already houses a lot of recreation activities, so that we can create some synergy with those sorts of things. Maybe instead of just the senior going to the senior center, maybe it's a family trip, and some people are going golfing, some are going to the pool, and some are going to activities at this multi-generational community center, and you get a lot of different community activity that could go along with it. We did ultimately scratch our head and decide that the Apple Barn site made a lot of sense. So this is one of our recommendations. That's a building that doesn't really seem to be living up to to its potential. Is that a nice way of saying that?
Architectural marvel.
So that seemed to be a site that might house well this kind of function. And how am I doing on time, Tom?
I think you're doing all right. I think these next few should go pretty quick.
Okay. So very high level. The blue box over there is a very high level look at the programming. We're looking at about 13,500 square feet. We do get a variety of different size rooms there to accommodate not only the senior functions, but also some of those other community programs. You can see it on the Apple Barn site. There's that aerial view, and again, reminding us that we create a synergy with the other recreational activities on that site. Here is a potential site plan, and again, this is conceptual at this point, but getting some parking that goes along with it. We did talk about creating some overflow expansion areas. So if you are doing meeting areas, so maybe it's not all paving, maybe it's a grass paved sort of thing where when there's a big event going on, you can expand into that. But you get a proper drop off for the seniors with the covered portico share sort of drop off, and then access to all of the function spaces. We also have the food bank access is in here, and the loan locker, the medical equipment loan locker, situated so that it can be accessed even even when times when senior center functions may not be going on, but because it's very much an appointment-based utilization of that space. Conceptual views of what this could possibly look like. Again, some covered entry, some trellis work, a scale that sort of, and an architecture that sort of fits in with the campus and the idea of Simsbury Farms. There's another view of that one. And all right, so now we finally get to the next step slide. I see Tom is ready to jump in right now, so I'll take a breath.
Well, that's great. Thanks, Jeff. I think you covered a lot of ground there. So really moving forward, it's taking all of these ideas, and I think, Jeff probably didn't stress enough that within Tecton's plan, it includes everything from the Parks and Rec master plan, and it also includes a lot of items that we already had on our CIP. They jumped in, again, we've been working on our CIP steady throughout the years, and they kind of jumped in to help us redirect it a little bit. And now the question is, how do we integrate some of our larger capital projects with the Board of Education capital projects? We also have some work, and I think Dick Ostap kind of mentioned, let's make sure we're picking the right projects. We're going to refine that a little bit, make sure that we're setting the right expectations. We're going to be working on how to package the projects together. We're not going to have a bid for very small projects because we're not going to get the best value from our contractors. There's a right size project for each and every project. And then the next thing, and we just briefly touched on it and we decided not to include it in any great detail now, is we've looked at the energy efficiency of all of our major buildings. And with that, we looked at the energy efficiency of, for example, the boilers at Eno, and CES, Consulting Engineering Services, one of the design professionals on the team, is now doing an analysis to show us the cost benefit should we decide to short cycle that old boiler at Eno, for example. If we're going to save $1,000 a month in its operating cost by replacing it 7 or 8 years early, how does that affect our operating budget versus our capital budget? And does it make sense to do that? Have a newer equipment that's going to run more efficiently rather than trying to, keep running on an old horse, so to speak. And then the other thing is, as part of this, Jeff touched on, they went into every boiler. They went deep down into the basements of all of these buildings, and they got the detailed information on all of our equipment. That's all going to be put into an electronic database along with the plans and all of the other information, so that our buildings and grounds staff and all of the facility managers will have that kind of at the touch of a button, so that when it's time to replace parts, when it's time to do maintenance, we're going to have much better record keeping, and we're going to be able to order the right part faster. It's not going to require everybody to, come out and look at it first. We're going to be able to give our design professionals all the right information. And so with that, we'd be really open to questions and looking at your thoughts as we move forward.
Okay, Tom and Jeff, thank you very much for this presentation and the work that went into it. This is really just the beginning of the conversation with our board, but I wanted to open it up and see what questions people had.
My question is, sitting here, seeing all this and being very active for a number of years here in town, and touching every one of these buildings we just talked about here in one way or another from the Public Building Committee, I would assume the Public Building Committee will be involved in these projects?
I don't know if Maria wants to answer that or Eric, but I think the Public Building Committee has a role and has always had a role, especially in some of our larger projects.
We've been involved in every one of these projects. I could tell you anything about any one of these buildings. As I said at the Eno Memorial, we just finished doing some work there, replacing windows, replacing kitchen areas. We looked at the fire system. I mean, I can tell you about everyone. For instance, the senior center, we looked at 4 or 5 places. We looked at the old South School down in Weetog. We looked at the corner of Stratton Brook and Bushy Hill Road. We looked at the Apple Barn. We've looked at all these already. We can tell you stories about all those projects. And I'm quite surprised that Jeff your team didn't sit with the Public Building Committee, get some input from them, because we have, look at what we're doing right now. We're doing Henry James Memorial School. That's a major project. And yet we're talking about adding on another grade to that school. We've done work at Latimer Lane. We've done work at Tooten Hills. We've done work at Squatter Line. I mean, we're putting a new roof on the high school right now. We just came out to bid on that. So we've been involved in all these projects. I think we could have been very helpful to. But anyways, I'm curious to know in the future just how, I assume and hopefully we'll be involved in these projects.
No, Dick, I think you bring up a good point. And part of why we're doing this now is by no means is this done.
No, I understand.
They are not done with their work. Nothing is written in stone. But we wanted them independently to come up with some of their own assessments to get to a point where we can start the conversation. And this is the first meeting in that larger process. And I know I was talking to Maria the other day about this, that without everybody's buy-in, this will never be a success. And this is the first step in getting people comfortable with where we're going.
Hey, Eric.
Chris, was that you?
Yeah. Hey, guys. How are you? Just three questions or points or whichever. First one, Jeff, just curious, in your travels, how would you rate our bocce court? I didn't know we had one, but are we tournament ready? Relative to other towns, I had no idea, so that's a big selling point. I want to make sure we put that into our profile marketing program. Tom, when we see the broader report, I'm curious, are there buildings on there, when you mentioned the total, how about decommissioning things that we own? How about decommissioning of assets? You talk about leveling the apple barn and repurposing the space, but when I think about the open space master plan we went through, and the consultants were sort of quite surprised about some of the places that we have for open space and how are they even accessible, usable, are they maintainable, and at some point they just get out of. So I'd be curious, and I hope that there's possibly recommendations to decommission or repurpose or combine one. Hopefully, if you could highlight that in a report. And then the second thing, to Mr. Ostap's point, I think it's really good. I think it would help, because Mr. Ostap and my mother have worked, have been peers, on many of these things over the years, at least conversationally. And yes, I think the senior center has been, there was probably a point where, it's been recommended for at least 10 different locations. So I'd love to see a comprehensive report compiled by somebody about all the locations of where the senior center could have been or should have been, and why or why not it wasn't done. And I hope that will help us frame that part of the discussion. That would be part of my request as part of this report, if the senior center is such a highlight aspect. I'm done. Thank you. Thanks, guys.
All right. Well, first thing, I think,
we could do that for you very quickly, Chris, because we sat through and talked about every one of those sites. And I think, Tom, Jackie, I think are involved in a few of them as well. As far as senior center locations go, they're always, somebody's got their foot in the yard for some reason. So
yeah,
a lot of them were just,
that would help us.
Yeah, a lot of them were just nothing. And I think with that information passed on to the committee, to the whole committee here, would be very, very helpful in the long run. Yes.
Yeah, and ultimately we voted to explore it down at the PAC, right. And then that went belly up because the PAC was unwilling, I believe, at the time to work with us, right? So
that's right.
Because we viewed it as a community center, and it from the PAC's point of view, this is where I famously talked to them.
Well, the PAC wanted more than what we were willing to give them as far as dollars and cents go. They wanted basically more addition to that to the theater stage area with rooms for meetings and bathrooms and so on and so forth, where the senior center was like 50 feet away. Where
the talent was famously going to have to walk across the parking lot. We suggested we buy them a red carpet to put down, but that didn't work.
There you go.
But yeah, so again, my point is, before we wade into this senior center argument again for the 15th time in this community.
Yeah, right. More than that.
I don't want to go down the road of the debates of Bushy Hill or North End or South End, because again, we're in for a 2-year, rabbit hole where nothing comes out the other side. So we need to be thoughtful with that one, because And
then you have people sitting out there too from the historic side saying the apple barn is nice, but don't tear the apple barn down. Redo that and add on to it. Make the apple barn part of the senior center.
Yeah, and
for historic reasons, because the apple barn, I remember going to the apple barn.
Yep. Oh yeah.
Yeah, Sean, my point is not to relook at each of those locations and reassess. It's it's revisit those locations and determine why they were they were deemed to be not feasible or not a good. So that helps me put guardrails around considering this location. That's all. It's not to reassess each of those for their value or current value.
Yeah, I mean, the debate at the time, Chris, was downtown or not, I think is what ended up winning the day.
Sure.
Sean, you're absolutely right. That was the key, was the downtown at that time. Everybody wanted it to be downtown because there were restaurants nearby. They could walk to here. They could walk across the street to the cemetery. They could do all these things they could do downtown. And that was the reason for basically converting the Eno into a senior center. Unfortunately, the senior center, the Eno was built, as I said, spoke out when they were speaking, was a movie theater one time. So how do you renovate that into a senior center? It was very, very hard. And they just took over the rooms downstairs. They just took over the upstairs. There was nothing really added on or made to them until just recently we did this stuff. Within the last, I don't know if Jeff Shea's here, but we just are still working on some of the things at the that we are part of that program.
Yeah, let me, if I could just jump in. And I don't want to get too far off. That was just something that we wanted to present as one of the options. Yep. And it's not intended to be just the senior center. It's also looking at some of the needs for the Parks and Rec. But to Chris's point about offloading the buildings, if the senior center and social services was to move out of Eno, which again is a very difficult building for the programming that they have there, it's challenging. The parking is challenging. The fact that it's a historic building limits us on what we can do in making it more ADA accessible. There's always been some challenges, but at the same time, it's a gorgeous building. It's a wonderful building in the center of Simsbury. And could that be repurposed? And we have some ideas of how that could be repurposed to be the movie theater that it once was, to be a performing arts center possibly. And then do we offload, not the ownership, but some of the maintenance costs and some of the other things, so that again, we're helping our bottom line, but at the same time, we're offering something better for the community for that building.
Tom, one of the ideas that the building committee had at one time we kicked around was, because of the additions and requirements at the town hall, we could take and move the probate court out of the town hall down into the Eno. It would work out very, very well, convenient-wise, area-wise, and then you give you more room at the town hall as well. So, I mean, there's all kinds of things of doing things like that, as you said, that should be looked at.
I want to just be conscious of time. We got about 5 minutes before we have to move on to our regular meeting. Are there other questions from the Board of Selectmen? This is great conversation, and we're going to have time to dig into all of these issues.
Yeah, just so as we're going to be evaluating the Board of Ed one, and as I frame my discussions here, these feel like a lot of items that have a pretty fair amount of float to when we do them. And not that they're not important, but 3 to 5 years is not unreasonable to turn into 5 to 10 in the taxpayer municipal space. Furnishing and fixtures, et cetera. I get it's nice, but we're running a government where we're not really allowed to do nice. We've got to do the basics. So it is the same kind of stuff in the Board of Eds.
I think maybe Jeff would be the best to answer that one.
That's another major project with the schools we're going through, even out this at the junior high school that we're working on right now. We're turning into change orders daily because, and again, they're not coming back through the committee. They're being done by the staff at the school or the Board of Education are saying, "Oh, put window shades on these windows." That wasn't part of the project to start with. And all
Dick, I'm just talking about, like the fire alarm stuff. And so for other folks here, and if this is out of scope, Jeff or Tom, let me know. But I'm just trying to get a base here. And again, I have no professional leg to argue with. I'm just, again, the fire alarm. And again, I appreciate 3 to 5, but again, is 3 to 5, 5 to 10.
They changed drastically.
Tom,
I wanted to see if, Maria, did you have any closing thoughts you wanted to offer?
Eric, did you guys hear me? I didn't get an answer to the question.
Oh, I'm sorry, Sean.
Okay. So if I understood the question question correctly, it's can we hold off on something like the security panels and fire alarms? Certainly can. That's part of the next phase of this in the discussion. And again, by no means is there any imminent danger, but is it working as well as it should? No. Is there the ability to do some of the voice announcements that you would have in a modern facility? The answer is no. But it's part of the larger discussion of when should we be programming these upgrades, and do we have an advantage to doing them in all of the buildings at the same time, so all of our major buildings will be running on the exact same system.
Yeah, when we do that analysis, I really want to make sure we don't go to the fancy, nice, we want it because it's cool and new versus we got to do this because the boiler's not going to heat the building kind of stuff, right? And that's generally, and I know, Tom, that's how you've operated and that's how we've operated in this town. Yeah. But we also have kilns in this town, where we make a lot of pottery. And I get that that's an important program activity, but I believe between the Board of Ed and the town, we got 5 of them, which I love to talk about another time. But, I just want to make sure that we're being extremely prudent with how we put this together and being very honest with the timeframes and the severity. Because at the end of the day, when somebody says it's severe, we're probably going to fund it, right? So I want to make sure we really, really dig through that kind of stuff.
A combination of some of these things can save the town some money in the long run. That should be looked at as an aspect, Sean, as well, because we've been going through finance problems for years. So I think that's
agreed. Yep. Spend to save is always something we're interested in. Sorry, Eric. I just wanted to. Yeah,
I appreciate it. That's fine, Sean. Maria, let me turn it over to you.
Yes, thank you. And Sean, actually, it was a really nice lead in into some of the closing thoughts that I had. I think the approach that we're taking as part of our capital budgeting is very consistent with the message that you've been hearing from me for the last several years, is that it's really important to maintain and invest in our current infrastructure that we already have before expanding into nice to have. And I think in terms of, again, philosophy, we don't need the Cadillac of everything. The Chevy will probably do, just fine in many cases. So I think you'll see that practical approach to our capital budgeting. And we did want the opportunity to at least share our findings to date. So just in terms of timing, this is actually very similar to how we proceeded with the Parks and Open Space Master Plan. You might recall we did, I believe, 2 updates in open session to provide status updates as we were working through the draft and the findings and the recommendation, and then ultimately had a final report we presented last fall. And the capital budgeting process for that was really sort of a 2-step process, and that the current year we're sitting in, we incorporated a lot of what we learned from the master plan, but now we're really taking that opportunity to better refine that. And so I think you'll see that in the upcoming capital budgeting plan, that this will provide us with a really good framework of where we sort of desire to go or need to go. But that, again, come next year, we'll be able to refine that, even better. But again, I think that where we landed will just be really informative and provide a nice framework to get that capital budgeting process going for us on this piece. And want to just, thank the team, Tecton, fantastic to work with. The quality of the work has been so good. Tom Roy, Ray Harris, Tom Fitzgerald. I'm probably forgetting somebody, but honestly, the team has just been, phenomenal to work with, and I really appreciate the hard work that they did. We actually got this started after the pandemic began, and so to complete this work under difficult conditions, I'm just very appreciative of everyone for their hard work and diligence.
Thank you, Maria. Is there anything that any other board member wanted to add before we adjourn ahead of our next meeting? Okay, so I'm told that the live stream is going to continue, so I'll ask that you, feel free to turn your camera off, put yourself on mute, and we'll be back at 6 o'clock. Is there a motion to adjourn from this special meeting?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, Tecton friends.
Thank you.